Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The porcelain plate slipped from Julian's trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a violence that echoed like a gunshot in the silent penthouse. But no one flinched. Not the little boy holding the crayon drawing, and certainly not the man sitting on the velvet armchair who had just uttered the single syllable that destroyed Julian's world. "Yes," Kalen Vance said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that seemed to darken the very air in the room. He didn't look at the shattered ceramic. His predatory, steel-gray eyes were locked onto the 4-year-old boy, Leo, who stood before him with hopeful innocence. Julian's breath hitched, his chest constricting painfully. Run, his instincts screamed. He was a recessive omega living in the den of a dominant alpha, a predator he had been forced to coexist with for 3 agonizing months. Kalen was cold, ruthless, a corporate warlord who treated emotions like inefficiencies to be deleted. And yet, when Leo, orphaned and desperate for a connection, had held up a crude drawing of a stick-figure family and asked the terrifying stranger to be his father, Kalen hadn't scoffed. He hadn't ignored him. He had agreed. And the look in Kalen's eyes wasn't one of charity. It was the look of a dragon claiming a horde. To understand the terror clawing at Julian's throat, one had to understand the contract. 3 months ago, Julian's life had been incinerated. His sister and her husband died in a car crash, leaving Leo behind. Julian, a struggling illustrator with a bank account that laughed at the concept of savings, had been thrust into guardianship. Then came the debts, his brother-in-law's gambling debts, to be precise. The sharks were circling, threatening to take Leo away to the foster system if Julian couldn't prove financial stability. Enter Kalen Vance. Kalen was the CEO of the media conglomerate Julian freelanced for. Through a twist of fate involving a spilled coffee, a ruined Armani suit, and a panic attack in an elevator, Kalen had made an offer. He needed a live-in housemate to deter his overbearing grandmother, who was insisting he marry. He needed the scent of an omega in his home to fake a relationship, but he didn't want the complications of a real partner. Julian needed a home and protection from the debt collectors. It was a business arrangement, a transactional coexistence. Kalen was the ice to Julian's fire. The alpha was fastidious, silent, and radiated a pheromone signature of crushed pine and ozone. Sharp, overpowering, and terrifyingly dominant. Julian, who smelled of soft rain and distressed vanilla, spent most of his time trying to make himself invisible. They were enemies by nature. Julian despised Kalen's arrogance. Kalen seemed to view Julian as a noisy, clutter-generating nuisance, which brought them back to the shattered plate. "Did you hear him, Uncle Ju?" Leo chirped, turning around, his small face beaming. "Mister." Kalen said yes. "He's gonna be my dad." Julian fell to his knees, not to clean the shards, but to level himself with his nephew. His hands shook as he reached out, avoiding the sharp porcelain. "Leo, baby, we talked about this. Mr. Vance he's our landlord. He's busy. We don't ask people for things like that." "I did not say I was busy." Kalen's voice cut through the room. Julian snapped his head up, glaring at the alpha. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. Kalen stood, his 6'3" frame unfolding with a lethal grace. He walked toward them, his expensive Italian loafers crunching softly on the smallest fragments of the plate. "What game are you playing?" Julian hissed, his protective instincts flaring. For a recessive omega, challenging a dominant alpha was biological suicide, but for Leo, Julian would fight God. "Don't get his hopes up. That is cruel, even for you." Kalen stopped inches from Julian. The smell of ozone spiked, static electricity dancing against Julian's skin. Kalen crouched down, ignoring Julian's defiance, and took the drawing from Leo's hand. "This is binding," Kalen said to the child, his tone serious, devoid of the mockery Julian expected. "A verbal contract. I am your father now, which means no one takes you away." Leo giggled, hugging Kalen's leg. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. Kaylin, a word. Now. The kitchen was a sleek, sterile expanse of stainless steel and black granite. Julian dragged Kaylin in there, away from Leo's ears. Are you insane? Julian whispered furiously, backing up until his hips hit the counter. He's a child, Kaylin. He lost his parents 3 months ago. He's looking for safety, and you're feeding a fantasy. When we move out, when this contract ends, you'll destroy him. Kaylin leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms over his broad chest. The sleeves of his dress shirt were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He looked unbothered, which only infuriated Julian more. Who said you are moving out? Kaylin asked calmly. The contract expires in 9 months. A lot can happen in 9 months, Kaylin interrupted. He pushed off the doorframe and took a step closer. And you are missing the point, Julian. The debt collectors, the ones belonging to the Viper, Silas Thorne, were seen outside the building this morning. Julian froze. Silas Thorne was the loan shark his brother-in-law had borrowed from. A man who dealt in flesh as often as cash. They found us? Julian whispered, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, drowning dread. They did, Kaylin said. He moved closer, trapping Julian against the counter. He didn't touch him, but his presence was a cage. They know you are weak. They know you have no resources. They plan to petition the court for custody of the boy as collateral, claiming you are unfit and homeless. Julian choked back a sob. I have a home. I'm here. You are a roommate, Kaylin corrected ruthlessly. In the eyes of the law, you are a transient guest. But if I am the father, if we are partners, then Leo is under the protection of the Vance family. Silas Thorne might be a viper, but I am the boot that crushes him. No one touches what is mine. Julian stared up into those storm-gray eyes. For the first time, he saw something other than cold indifference. He saw a possessiveness that made his Omega instincts shudder with a mix of fear and want. Why? Julian asked, his voice trembling. Why would you do this? You don't like children. You barely tolerate me. Kaylin's gaze dropped to Julian's lips, then back to his eyes. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I tolerate what is necessary, Kaylin murmured, and I find that I dislike the idea of anyone else breaking you. That is my privilege. It was a twisted, arrogant declaration. He should have made Julian slap him. But God help him. The promise of safety was so seductive, so overwhelming, that Julian nodded. Fine, Julian breathed. Fake dad, fake family. But you don't hurt him. You break his heart, Kaylin, and I will kill you. Kaylin smirked, a dangerous, rare expression that transformed his handsome face into something devilish. Deal. The following weeks were a blur of cognitive dissonance. Julian expected Kaylin to be a distant figurehead, a father in name only. He expected the alpha to retreat to his office and ignore them. He was wrong. Kaylin approached fatherhood with the same terrifying efficiency he applied to hostile takeovers. He didn't play catch, he taught Leo chess. He didn't read fairy tales. He read simplified history books and explained strategy. And Leo adored him. But it was the domestic shifts that unmoored Julian. It started with the scenting. One evening, Julian was curled up on the sofa, exhausted from a deadline, when Kaylin sat down next to him. Not on the other chair. Next to him. You smell like distress, Kaylin noted, not looking up from his tablet. I'm tired. The agency rejected the sketches, Julian mumbled, closing his eyes. He felt a heavy weight settle over his shoulders. He opened his eyes to find Kaylin draping his own suit jacket over Julian. The scent of pine and ozone enveloped him instantly, warm, heavy, and aggressively claiming. Keep it on, Kaylin ordered softly. It masks the anxiety. It annoys me. You're impossible, Julian muttered, snuggling deeper into the jacket. The scent should have been suffocating. Instead, it acted like a sedative. His heartbeat slowed. He felt safe. And you are incapable of self-preservation, Kaylin retorted. But he didn't move away. His thigh pressed against Julian's, a line of heat that burned through the fabric. The fake relationship was bleeding into reality. Julian found himself cooking for 3, not 2. Kaylin started coming home earlier. The penthouse, once a cold museum, began to look like a home. Toys on the rug. The smell of cooking food mixing with the sharp pine of the alpha. But the peace was fragile. The breaking point came a month later. It was a rainy Tuesday. Julian had picked Leo up from preschool. They were walking towards the private car Kaylin had insisted they use, when a black van screeched to a halt at the curb. 3 men jumped out. Betas. Bulky, smelling of stale tobacco and violence. Julian Vane? One of them grunted. Julian shoved Leo behind him. Get back in the school, Leo. Run. Grab the kid, the leader shouted. Julian screamed, swinging his heavy tote bag at the first man. It connected with a satisfying thud, but the second man grabbed Julian by the hair, yanking him back. Pain exploded in his scalp. Let him go, Julian shrieked, kicking and clawing. He was an Omega. He wasn't built for this, but adrenaline turned his fear into a feral frenzy. Daddy, Leo screamed. The sound of a car engine roaring like a beast cut through the rain. Kaylin's sleek black sedan mounted the curb, smashing into a decorative planter inches from the kidnappers. The door flew open before the car even fully stopped. Kaylin didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a monster. His pheromones flooded the street, so potent and aggressive that the betas flinched, instinctively cowering. This was dominant alpha intent. Pure, unadulterated murderous rage. Touch them, Kaylin roared, his voice distorted by a growl. And I will tear your throats out with my teeth. The kidnappers hesitated. That hesitation cost them. Kaylin moved with a speed that blurred. He didn't fight, he dismantled. A fist to the throat dropped the one holding Julian. A sweeping kick shattered the knee of the second. The third scrambled back toward the van, terrified by the sheer pressure of the alpha's aura. Julian fell to the wet pavement, gasping for air, clutching his stinging scalp. Kaylin didn't chase the van. He dropped to his knees in the rain, ignoring the mud ruining his suit. He grabbed Julian's face between his large hands. Julian, Kaylin demanded, his eyes wild, pupils dilated so much his eyes looked black. Where are you hurt? Tell me. I'm
okay, Julian stammered, shaken violently.
Leo. Check Leo. Leo was crying, clinging to Kaylin's side. Kaylin scooped the boy up with one arm, pulling him against his chest, but he didn't let go of Julian. You're bleeding, Kaylin said, his thumb brushing a small cut on Julian's lip. The alpha's hand was trembling, not from fear, but from the effort of restraining himself from killing the men who had fled. Kaylin, Julian whispered, looking at the man he had called an enemy. Rain plastered Kaylin's dark hair to his forehead. He looked savage. He looked magnificent. I told you, Kaylin growled, pressing his forehead against Julian's, mixing their rain-soaked breaths. No one touches what is mine. You are mine, Julian. This isn't a contract anymore. Do you understand? The realization hit Julian harder than the beta's fist. The way Kaylin looked at him, the scent marking, the jealousy, the protection. It had never been just business for Kaylin. Maybe in the beginning, but not for a long time. And as Julian stared into those fierce, terrified eyes, he realized he didn't want it to be business either. I understand, Julian breathed. Kaylin crushed his mouth to Julian's. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, desperate, possessive, tasting of rain and iron and love. Julian melted into it, his hands gripping Kaylin's soaked shirt, anchoring himself to the only solid thing in his chaotic world. The aftermath was a flurry of lawyers and police. Silas Thorne was arrested within the hour. Kaylin had seemingly unleashed the full might of his legal and criminal connections the moment the attack happened. That night, the penthouse was quiet again. Leo was asleep, exhausted by the drama, tucked safely between them in the massive master bed. Kaylin lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. Julian lay beside him, his head resting on Kalen's chest, listening to the steady, powerful thrum of the Alpha's heart. "You knew," Julian whispered into the darkness. "About the attack? That's why you were there. I had a tracker on the car. I saw it deviate from the usual route," Kalen admitted, his hand absent-mindedly stroking Julian's hair. "I broke every traffic law in the city to get to you. You said I was yours." Kalen's hand stilled. "I did. Did you mean it?" Kalen shifted, turning so he could look at Julian. The moonlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sharp angles of his face. He looked softer now, the rage replaced by a simmering intensity. "I don't say things I don't mean, Julian. The contract was an excuse. I wanted you in my house. I wanted you in my life. I just didn't know how to ask without scaring you away." Julian let out a wet laugh. "So you let my nephew propose for you?" "He has better people skills than I do," Kalen replied dryly. Julian propped himself up on one elbow. He traced the line of Kalen's jaw. "You're still arrogant. And you're still messy," Kalen countered, capturing Julian's hand and kissing the palm. "But you're my mess. And he is my son." "He's my nephew." "He's our son," Kalen corrected, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We will adopt him. Together. Unless you have an objection to making this permanent." It was a proposal. Not of marriage, perhaps not yet, but of a lifetime. A binding of souls far stronger than the paper contract they had signed 3 months ago. Julian looked at the sleeping boy between them, then at the Alpha who would burn the world down to keep them warm. "No objections," Julian whispered, leaning down to seal the promise with a kiss. "But you're still on dish duty, and that is how the viper tamed the wolf." If you enjoyed seeing Kalen lose control to protect what's his, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments. Would you forgive a husband who manipulated a contract just to keep you close? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.